Hello and welcome to the November edition of the OAR program. Today we have a wide-ranging topic, relationships, but we're going to focus on just a single aspect of it really, things that we have every day. And the actual title is the quality of our relationships. 4 keys to better relationships. Quite a mouthful for a title, but it's a very good one. And I'll now hand over to Francis and Steven to take us through relationships or some aspects thereof.
Thanks so much, Graham. It's great to see you and to be with the both of you again. Relationships. I actually love to play golf, and I got my first hole-in-one when I was 16 years old. Now, this should have been the most joyful, happiest moment of my life. You know, I hit this perfect shot, took 2 bounces right in the cup. Now, I should have been overjoyed, but it was actually one of the worst moments of my life because I was alone. No one witnessed it. No one was there to share this moment with me. And even now, people go, yeah, right, you got a hole-in-one. So I realized as I look back on that moment that life is really meant to be lived in relationship. You know, when I think of the creation story where God declared all of creation as not just good, but very good, there was only one thing in that whole creation story where God said wasn't good. God said it's not good for human beings to be alone. We're meant, I think we're created, we're meant to be in relationship. And I suspect when we think about when we're the most miserable, when we're the most frustrated, when we're the most sad, I would guess that more often than not, it's connected in some way to our relationships. And I suspect when we think of when we're the most joyous, the most grateful, the happiest, I suspect in some way it's connected to our relationships. So as the title suggests, could it be that the quality of our life is in many ways the quality of our relationships? And I remember learning where a psychoanalyst, Karen Horney, suggested in our relationships, one of 3 things is always happening. We're either moving away from each other, we're moving against each other, or we're moving towards each other. And that's so often when we're stressed, when life is hard, or maybe when there's conflict. I think we have these habitual ways of moving away, habitual ways of moving against that actually create more stress and conflict. So I'm wondering if the key is, especially in times of stress, is to move towards each other. And I'm wondering if we actually can improve the quality of our lives by taking the time to tend to our relationships and find even simple ways to move towards each other. Francis, you and I have had the privilege to spend time, and I think it is a sacred privilege to spend time with people, you know, at the end of their lives. And I don't know about you, as I spend time with people at the end of their lives, I've never heard anybody say to me, you know, I just have one wish. I wish I could go back and finish that project at work, or I just wish I could drive my car one more time, or, you know, I wish I could count how much money I have in my bank account. I don't hear that. What I hear more often than not is gratitude for relationships. gratitude for the people they love and the people who love them. And more often than not, if there are any regrets expressed, what I often hear are regrets that maybe I didn't love well enough, or perhaps I didn't forgive easily enough. So Francis, I'm curious, what do you think? What do you think the role relationships play in the quality of our lives and in our mental, emotional, spiritual well-being?
Hello. This is a very important topic. What part do our relationships play? Relationships with each other? I would add something more to that and say, how do we relate to ourselves? What sort of relationship do we have to our own inner being, to our own self-awareness? How are we with ourselves? Because sometimes we are very negative about ourselves, and that gets transmitted in our relationships. So it's how are we with each other? How are we with ourselves? How are we with the world? How are we with the world? So these different ways of relating will spell out whether we have happiness to transmit or whether we feel angry and closed in our attitude to each other and the world.
You know, I really appreciate that you reminded us of that, and you brought us back to our relationship with ourselves to begin with. I love that phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup. Or if your cup is full of anger yourself, that's what you're going to pour forth. Or if your cup is empty, you're not going to have the energy perhaps, or the capacity perhaps to care. So I really appreciate where Karen Horney is saying that an important key is to move towards one another, that what I heard you just say, well, let's just make sure that we also move towards ourselves in a positive way. And if we move towards ourselves in a positive way, we're more likely then to be able to move towards one another in a positive way.
I think we need to add to that. What are our intentions? We're going to move towards each other with the intention of being in a relationship, or with the intention of expressing discontent, anger. What do we intend as part of our moving towards each other? Or even when we're moving against each other, what is our intention? What do we hope to achieve? What's going on here in our different ways of being towards each other, being away from each other, being against each other?
I think that is so important, intention. There is a sign I really appreciate this, at a hospital in Indiana, the Indiana Health University, I think it's called, or the University of Health, something like that. But there's a sign as you walk in the front door that says, please take responsibility for the energy that you bring into this building. So again, what is your intention? And I think what Karen Horney is saying is to have our intention be to move towards each other. And I think there are 4 important intentions that will help us move towards each other. And I think the first intention, to be of good intent, the first movement, if you like, the movement towards each other, I guess I would phrase as, I see you. Because we often take one another for granted, I think. And I think one of the greatest sources of stress and conflict in our relationships results from people not feeling seen or valued. I think a really simple question that I think is really important to ask do people feel important in my presence? Do people feel seen in my presence? Do people feel valued in my presence? I mean, many, many years ago, Francis, you introduced me to the work of Martin Buber, which I am really grateful for. And I love his concept of I and thou. And that was the book you handed me one day and said, read this. I feared there was going to be a test. But I love that book. And that sense that we tend to relate to others in one of two ways, either I, it, where the other person really is there to serve our purposes, is there to serve our needs, or I, thou. And when someone is an I, it, they exist merely to kind of serve us. And in doing that, do we see them? Do we value them? For the I, it equation, the question isn't, does this person feel valued, important? I think the question is, why isn't this person making me feel important and valued? Why isn't this person meeting my needs? And I, thou is an entirely different movement. I, thou, I think you actually see and treat the person as worthy in their own right. You see and affirm their value, not in terms of what they can do for you, but they have value in their own right. I read the story of this philosophy class at Northwestern University in Chicago, and the teacher was giving a test. And there were 10 questions, and most of the questions were about the meaning of life and asking the students to articulate the meaning of life through the lens of Aristotle or Socrates. The 10th question, the teacher asked these students in this philosophy class, what is the name of the woman who cleans the classroom? She's here every day, he said. She's here every day when we arrive, and we have seen her for an entire year. What's her name? So all of the students wrestled with Aristotle and Socrates and the meaning of life, and they turned their paper in, and one student said that last question about the cleaner, that won't count towards our grade, will it? And the professor said, actually, that last question is worth double, because the meaning and quality of our lives is dependent on realizing that every person we meet has value and worth and deserves to be seen and heard. And this woman, we've seen her every day for a year. How many of us have stopped to ask, how are you? Who are you? How many of us have actually moved towards her? And he said, for most of us, she has just been invisible and cleaning our room rather than a thou. So I think that relates to the cleaners, but I think it also relates to the people in our household. Do people feel seen in our presence? Do they feel important? And I think that question, just asking ourselves that question, can help us move towards others. So you gave me the book, you gifted me the book, I and Thou. So I'm curious what you think of Buber's concept of I, it, and I, thou, and how when we treat someone as I, thou, we move towards them, and maybe we also help them move towards themselves. What do you think?
Can we allow the person to be there as another person without calculating what good are they to me? what can they do for me? What is their value to me? Can they be there for who they are in themselves without having us define them in terms of their use, if you like, in terms of their what they'll do, what they can do for us or for people. So it's a matter of allowing people to be there in the fullness of their personality and to say, here I am, you are, he is. Very important words. They spell out our world, and in particular, our world of relationships or relating.
I think that's so right, to not only to allow people to be there, in some ways to be there as they are, not even as we wish them to be. And I think one of the ways we do that and move towards people is I see you, but I think another way is I hear you. Because I think so often we listen to one another with the intent to reply. You know, we wait for people to take a breath and then we can offer our opinion or what we think. And we don't listen with the intent for the other person to feel heard. Because even when there are disagreements, I often think the goal isn't to disagree less, because conflict is inevitable. I think the goal is to disagree better, to be better at listening more deeply. And I think one of the ways that we move towards one another, especially when there's tension and conflict, is to focus on empathy. And I've often understood empathy as being able to suspend ourselves long enough, to set ourselves aside long enough that we might actually to be able to enter into the other person's experience. And I think a key difference is, in order to practice empathy, I think we must be willing to believe the other person as they see it, not how we imagine their experience to be. And I think that's another way we allow people to be there. We allow them, we're willing to believe the other person and to enter into their experience, as opposed to how we think their experience should be, or what we think the solution to their experience might be. In general, I've noticed that most people, unless they're paying a therapist, I've noticed that most people don't want to be fixed. They don't want to be saved. They don't want to be convinced. They don't want to be converted. They don't want to be solved. I think people want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be validated. I mean, I had a man come to me not long ago, and he said to me, "I don't understand my wife. She makes no sense to me. I just don't understand her. I don't get it. What should I do?" And being the ever helpful person that I am, I said, stop trying. Stop trying to understand your wife. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to make it your mission in life to make sure she feels understood. And you don't necessarily have to agree. It doesn't necessarily have to make sense to you. But to move towards your wife, she needs to feel heard and understood and validated. And I said to this man, I said, you know, if our goal is to understand the person we're talking to, we're thinking to ourselves, is this right? Does this make sense? Do I agree? And I said to him, notice where the frame of reference is. The frame of reference is not your wife. The frame of reference is you. You're the frame of reference. You're listening through your own lens, waiting for an opportunity to, in some ways, project that lens onto her. You're waiting for an opportunity to offer your opinion, your solution, your ideas. And I think if your goal instead, I said to him, was to help her to feel understood, you'd say something like, this is what I hear you saying. Is that right? Tell me more. I'm curious. Or, wow, I can hear how hard it is for you. I know when I find myself often wanting to judge another person, or when I find myself in that space where somebody's talking and I know deep down inside that what I really want to do is I want to argue because, I don't agree. I find it helpful to shift my energy from judgment to curiosity. So rather than judging someone's experience as right or wrong, and I'm waiting for an opportunity to argue or fix or solve, instead I try to be curious and wonder, I wonder why they think this way. I wonder what life stories have kind of shaped and led them to view the world the way they view the world. Or I wonder why my perspective is so threatening. I think so. I was encouraging this man to just be curious rather than solve his wife, fix his wife. Be curious. Because I think curiosity breaks contempt. So I'm wondering if a powerful way we can move towards one another is not only to see the person, but to make sure that person feels heard. So Francis, what do you think about this importance of shifting from listening to each other with the intent to reply or fix or solve versus listening in a way, creating space where they might feel heard and validated? And why do you think that's so difficult for us to do? Because it seems really hard for most of us to do.
I remember one man, a middle-aged man, well-educated, who came to see me about some issues of his life. And he talked to me, and then I talked to him. And eventually he said, would you shut up and listen to me? And I remember that ever since. Would you shut up and listen to me? And sometimes we need to do that because we're so anxious to say something. We need to put our word in. Or we need to tell him, we know what he's talking about. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Shut up and listen to me. So if the person said, would you shut up and listen to me? What would you hear? You hear a person trying to make sense of what is going on in each other and between each other. The in-between is a very powerful circumstance. What's going on between us? Would you shut up and listen to me? It's a good lesson, isn't it?
I mean, I love that. And it just reminds me there's such a critical difference between me trying to make sense of what you're saying versus me being the kind of presence where I'm listening, creating the space where you can make sense of what you're saying yourself. And me trying to make sense of what you're saying and then casting my judgment on what you're saying will separate us. Where me trying to just listen, listen without judgment, listen to create the kind of space such as saying, okay, this is what I hear you saying, or tell me more, is helping you make sense of what you're saying. But if you feel judged, or if you feel like my intent is to fix, to solve, to convince, to convert, you then don't have the internal space to try to make sense of what you're saying. So it seems like the greatest gift we can give in some ways is that gift of space without judgment, so that Parker Palmer, a writer who I admire, says our goal sometimes should be in relationship to help each other to reflect deeply into speech, where he says he kind of talks about it, create the kind of space where the person can reflect deeply so that they can speak what they know, as opposed to waiting to hear what we think we know about what they're saying. So I think what you're saying is really powerful.
How can we achieve that? If we're always anxious to tell him what's wrong or what he should do, we're waiting to intrude ourselves into the conversation without standing back and saying, well, where do we go from here? What are we hearing? So I put the question to you, as you and I speak now, and we say, well, what is important? How to be present to the other person without intruding ourselves too much or at all into the situation, into what he's saying or she's saying. How can I be present in a expansive, revelatory way, so they can relate and reveal themselves as they feel safe to do so? How can I be present so that the other person can feel safe and empowered, if you like, or willing to be present as I am wanting to be present?
I think a couple things related to that. I think empathy is so misunderstood. And I love the definition of empathy that isn't so much me, again, trying to think about what I believe about the person's experience, but it is that willingness to believe the other person's experience as they see it, not how I imagine it to be. So again, it's really that creating that space that you're not imposing your agenda, you're not imposing your worldview, your needs onto the other person. You're truly, I guess, the trite way of saying, you're truly trying to get inside their shoes and see the world as they see it. And I think that can be really powerful. I think the other part of that, though, the other part is, I think, connects to one of the other ways I think we can move towards one another, is to not have a need to be right. I really think that's, particularly these days, in America anyway, where everybody's right. There's something powerful in our relationships when we let go of the need to be right. I can't remember that saying. Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? choose carefully, because the chances are you can't have both at the same time. And I've Brene Brown, a social worker, social scientist, who's really popular here in the United States. She once said, we are not here to be right. We are here to get it right. Most of our relationships could use a whole lot less armor and defensiveness and a whole lot more humility and willingness to learn. There's an Israeli poet by the name of Yehuda Amici who said, flowers never grow in the spring in the places we are right. In the places we are right, the ground is hard and trampled. And I've noticed that so often, particularly these days, particularly in America, where things are so divisive. So many conversations, even within families, the conversations start from the places where people feel they're right. And their intent is to prove the other person wrong. You know, and I often ask, okay, so when is the last time you changed someone's mind or improved a relationship by convincing them they're wrong or stupid? That rarely ever happens. And I think to let go, to have the humility to kind of have less armor and have the humility to let go of the need to be right, doesn't mean we are wrong. It means we value the relationship in this moment over the need to be right. And I think if we can let go of the need to be right and to prove, what it can do is create the kind of relational container that can keep the dialogue going. And I think that's the goal. The goal isn't to be right. The goal is to keep the dialogue going. Again, I've never heard anybody on their deathbed say to me, I knew I was right. I think, I wonder sometimes if we could enter into every conversation wearing a little less armor, being willing to recognize that there's always something to learn rather than something to prove. So I'm curious, Francis, what do you think about the wisdom of knowing when it's best to let go of our need to be right? And what would it look like in our relationships to have a little less armor and a little more humility?
Well, it's really, a lot of it is often about being part of a conversation. Are we part of a conversation? Or are we here to tell people how they should behave or what they should do? Can we be part of can we contribute positively and caringly? What are the words we use? Contribute to a conversation. And that was Martin Buber's strong point, was his I and thou, that was a conversation. How can I be I and allow you to be a thou, without me wanting to wipe your thou-ness out while I tell you about my I-ness? How can I and thou run together in a positive, enriching experience for both of us?
I really love what you said there, what I heard you say is that question of, well, how am I contributing to this relationship? There's a civil rights leader, her name is Ruby Sales, and she said, transformation never happens in headspace. where we ask one another, well, what do you think? And then we share opinions and try to prove that my opinion is right. She said, transformation often happens in heart space, where we don't necessarily ask, well, what do you think? Instead, we ask, well, where does it hurt? And then create the kind of space where you allow people to tell their stories. So I sometimes wonder whether one of the things we can contribute in a relationship is to move from, because I think it happens in the head space, and thou happens in the heart space, where our intent is to be focused maybe less on the content of what they're saying, and focus more on wanting to hear kind of the stories that lead to that content, kind of connect to them at the heart level. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it does, because we're listening and say, what are you hearing? But what do you feel?
Yeah.
What are you feeling about this? Because often we're imposing ourselves and our opinion without listening to the feeling that's in the communication. So how do we feel? And what difference do our feelings make to the content and the value of the conversation? What do you feel?
Yeah. There's a phrase I've often appreciated, and I don't remember who said it. Isn't that what creativity is? Just forgetting who said it in the first place?
I think so.
But the phrase is, look for the innocence behind the behavior. And I remember my father who died of Alzheimer's. And I remember one time when he was in the hospital and he was in a kind of a hallucination. And my father could fix everything. He could build everything. He could fix everything. He was amazing. And I did not inherit that gene. So he was in the hospital in this hallucination, and he was fixing something, and he was asking for tools. And, I just got a validation therapy. I wanted to kind of go with him, go with his story. So I was reaching for the tool and handed him to the tool, and he would swear at me and just be so angry and almost violently angry, swearing at me because I was handing him the wrong tool. I said to my wife, oh my God, I can't even get it right in his hallucination. I'm handing him the wrong tool. Now I could have gotten really upset and hurt by that. Or I could look beyond the behavior and recognize there is an innocence beyond the behavior. And for him, it's his disease. And for many people, it's fear, or it's hurt, or it's pain that's driving that behavior. So rather than reacting to the behavior, pause, take a moment, be curious. What's behind the behavior?
What happens if we don't have the time? This is what I believe. I don't have the time to spend yabbering backwards and forwards with you about this and that and what you believe. This is what the situation is. So why not accept that and get on with life? Otherwise, we go talk backwards and forwards until we say, what are you on about? What are you really talking about? Put some substance into it and get on with it. Back to you.
I think that's where it gets back to letting go of the need to be right. And sometimes when we just let go of the need to be right, it can create the kind of relationship, the relational container, that somewhere down the track we can continue the dialogue. But if we just kind of hammer back and forth at each other, we're more than likely kind of destroying trust and the chances of us continuing that dialogue are more slim.
Notice that as you talk, as we talk, we keep using the words I and what you're saying. You should think like this. I think like that. The I, the you, the I, the thou are in constant back and forth. So what is your I? What is the thou that is important? Is it important to listen to the thou, the you part of it? Or do I just want to say, look, this is what I think. I think you would be better off if you listen to me. Shut up and listen to me. But we don't do that. So what's a better way of doing it, do you think? How can we help ourselves and other people to listen to each other differently? Hopefully, openly, caringly. What can help us open the book in a different way from what we have traditionally done?
And I think if we go back to that basic premise of the three movements, when we just decide, okay, this is what I think, and to heck with you. Again, we're either moving. So one of the things we might do is we might just keep our mouths shut, but internally we shut down. So we're moving away. Or we say, well, this is what I think. I don't care what you think. We're moving against. So I think the thou is keeping the thou intact and the move towards. I think there's another movement, which is, I think, just such a powerful question. What do you need? How can I best care for you in this moment? I think one of the most important ways to express care for another is to care for them in the way they desire to be cared for, which may not be at all in the way that we're comfortable caring or what we think they need. And ironically, I think one of the greatest sources of stress in our relationships is we tend to care about others in the way we ourselves would like to be cared for. I mean, Jesus said, treat others as you want to be treated, right? The golden rule. Now, I think Jesus was wrong. Because if we treat others the way we want to be treated, we're assuming they're just like us. We're assuming their needs are the same as our needs. And it's a kind of self-centered approach, really a self-focused approach. So instead of the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, I sometimes wonder about the platinum rule, which is treat others as they need and desire to be treated. So I think one of the most powerful questions we can ask is, what do you need? Rather than assuming we know what we need, rather than thinking, I have the solution for you, I know how to fix you. What do you need? How can I best support you right now? I think this is a powerful question. What would love look like for you right now? Because so often we think we know what the other person needs, or we think we know what's best for the other person. We might think we're loving, but in fact, we're imposing our worldview on them. So I'm curious if moving towards someone else is being willing to love them in a way that resonates and connects with who they are and what they need. I mean, just a quick story. I need affirmation. I grew up in a household. I'm the youngest, and they were tired by the time I got around. They got around to me. So I grew up in a household that was kind. Honestly, Yeah, but there was no affirmation. I never quite knew where I stood. You know, if I had a report card of 6 A's and 1 B, the question would be, why did you get a B? And it was, I mean, honestly, it was about encouragement. Anyway, I'm neurotic. Rather than try to tell you why I'm neurotic, I like to hear people tell me, you're okay. You know, you did a good job. Well done. I care about you. Verbally, hearing that verbally is really important to me. I happen to be married to somebody who is the most grounded, self-contained person I've ever met in my life. That kind of verbal affirmation is not all that important to her. What's really important to her is service, doing things. Good example would be making the bed. I could care less whether the bed was made. I mean, I sleep with one leg out. So to me, somebody who makes a bed and tucks in the sheets, that's a pain because I have to kick the sheets out. So as far as I'm concerned, never make a bed ever. I mean, wash the sheets, but you don't have to make a bed. But for my wife, we're both really busy, lead fairly chaotic lives. So making the bed, at least there's a part of the day that has some order. There's order in the chaos. So I might tell her 5,000 times during the day, I love you, I care about you, you're important to me, because I like to hear that. But I also can be a fairly self-centered person where I kind of get obsessed in my own stuff. So I'm about my work and the things I have to do. So I don't notice the dishes or the bed or this or that. So even though I said, I love you 5,000 times, she feels a distance from me because I've not communicated care in the way she hears it or she needs it. But if I make the stupid bed in the morning, I've said, I love you 10,000 times. Because that's the way she needs to be loved. So I think there's something really powerful when we love, when we care, when we express care for one another in the way that the other person needs to hear it and where it most resonates with them. So what do you think about, I mean, I just said that I hope this isn't broadcast to too many people because I just said Jesus is wrong. So what do you think about the golden rule, this idea of treat others as you want to be treated, which I think is pretty selfish, versus the platinum rule, treat others as they most need to be or desire to be treated? What do you think?
Well, you see, often we don't know what the other person needs, what is best for them. And so we get muddled in the transaction. We're doing things we think that should please them. Doesn't please them. So that's not what I meant. I don't want that at all. So we get a misfit here. We think we know what is good. We act as if we know what is best for them, or what they need, what we think they need. But it is not a fact. They don't want that at all. They want something else. So I think we need to turn this around a little bit to say, can we participate in a conversation? The I-thou is a conversation between you and me, between where you are and where I am, and where we can have a meeting point between you and me. That's not always easy. Often it's extremely difficult. So we have to pause a while and say, how can I listen and act and listen, so that the people within the conversation can feel that they are part of a conversation, rather than listening to someone who's giving a directive. I don't know whether that expresses it adequately, but it's at least one way of putting it, I think.
You know, I think that's so powerful because I think just even the act of taking the time, because what I heard you say is sometimes we're muddled and we don't know what the other person needs, and that's right. And we try to figure it out, and we try to anticipate, and we try to solve, we try to fix, and that's coming from a good place. It's coming from a good intent, but it's also coming from imposing our worldview onto them. So I think sometimes even the simple question, what do you need? What I discover sometimes is the person themselves may not know what they need. But that question can be one of the greatest gifts. If you can pause, if you can actually listen and create space when you're not jumping in and say, here's what I think you need. But if you can ask that question and be patient, and you're asking the question with the intent of the other person is a thou, you're going to respect the answer. You haven't decided, you already know what the answer is. You're giving that person an opportunity to really think, well, what do I need? Deep down, what do I need? What is important to me? What would help me to feel most loved and cared for in this moment? Because I'm guessing, I mean, life is so chaotic that so often I don't think people themselves know the answer to that question. So by giving people the opportunity to reflect on that question deeper is creating the opportunity for them to actually have their needs met, which is beautiful.
Well, I suppose we return to what my man said to me when he said, would you shut up and listen to me? Because we've often think we've got something to say here. Or it would be better if we shut up for a while and listen. Because we don't know what he wants. He doesn't know what he wants. But we want to be part of a conversation for a while.
Right.
Can we be part of a conversation whereby we talk and the position of each and the other unfolds? There's an imposition and there's an unfolding. What do we want to be part of? We often feel more comfortable to be part of the imposition. This is what you should do. Would you shut up and listen to me? Would you do it my way? Instead of saying, no, wait a minute. Perhaps we need to do it a different way and let it unfold. How will things be if a different way unfolds? I'll shut up and listen to you.
You know, this too can happen at such a global scale. I actually know of a church who do some mission work in East Africa. And they have a relationship with this village, and they decided, because it was important to them, education was really important to them, and they really, really wanted to feel good about making sure all of the children in that village have an opportunity to be educated. And so they raised a ton of money. And so they built a school so these kids could go to school. And if you had asked the villagers what they needed, more than anything else, is they really needed a well. They needed water. And water would not only help them sustain their life together, but water was essential for them to grow the crops they needed in order to farm their own land. And so here are these kids, so they built this school, but the kids were starving. So because they weren't able to grow food, the kids were malnourished and starving, hence then not able to learn. To me, that's just like this classic example of how, from a good place, a good intent, you know, I think I know what you need, so this is what you need, and I'm going to do it. And no one bothered to ask, wow, what would be most important to you? This church wanted to build a school. That was what felt important to them. But they didn't stop to ask, wow, what would love look like for you? And what they would have heard was, we really need a well. We really need water.
Well, I think you need a school. Where do we go then? They think they need a well. I think they need a school. It might take longer to get their well, but if they got the school, it comes in different ways, doesn't it? If they get a school, they then will realise, oh, we also need that well. But if I go in first and say, I know what you need a well, they're already pulling one and say, we don't need a well, we need a school. Well, we don't even want a school. You think I need a school. So there's no meeting point being achieved here. How do we reach the point where we listen to each other, where we talk to each other in a different way, where we hear each other? It's very different from saying, what do you need? I know what you need. You need a well. Well, we think we need a school, etc. To go both ways. So it's very difficult to reach a point where we can say we're agreeing upon a conjoint action whereby we need a well and a school. We need this and that, not this or that. Well, that's rather a bit complicated, I think, but what else can we say?
Well, I think that what you just said kind of summarizes the journey we've been on in this conversation. That I think it's all about, are we moving away from each other? Are we moving against each other? Well, how do we move towards each other? Well, we first begins, I need to see you. I need you no longer, it's important that you're no longer invisible. It's important that I no longer treat you as if your needs aren't of value. You're an it. I need to see you. You're a thou. And then I need to take the time to hear you, to really hear what you have to say, not to hear what I think I would like you to say, but to really hear what you have to say. And that there's no way that I'm going to hear you if I'm not willing to let go of my need to be right. if I don't let go of my need to prove that what you're saying is wrong. And then finally, it really does come down to, how can I best care for you right now? What would that look like? How can I love and express care for you in a way that resonates with what you deep down really need? And that's just really a beautiful thing. We fill our lives with so much conversation and we miss each other. I honestly, profoundly believe that simple question, what do you need, can be just revolutionary and transformational.
Yes, but the yes, but is, I don't know what I need. And I don't think you know what I need either. So we get into a conflict about, what do I need? What do you think I need? And so we reach a stalemate here. We don't go anywhere because you think you know what I need. I think you're talking nonsense. So where do we go then?
I think it goes where I say, it's okay. It's okay not to know what you need. Most of us don't. But I want you to know that your needs are important to me. So let's keep talking about it.
Can I believe that? Can I believe that it's important to you? I don't think it's that important to you.
I hear you. But I think if you had felt prior to this, if you had felt seen, where you really felt like I see you, you're not invisible to me. back to that question, do people feel important in my presence? Am I providing the kind of presence where you feel valued? And then if in the way that I'm listening to you, if I'm listening not with the intent to reply, but truly listening, and I'm not trying to prove myself to you, I think what I'm doing is I'm creating the relational container where there just might be just an inkling of trust there, that you began our conversation with, what is your intention? I think if I do those other things, back to Karen Horney's premise, not to move against, move away, but to move towards. If I'm doing those things, I want to suggest that I'm moving towards you, and that we're creating the kind of relational container where there's trust. So we may not know the answer today, but we can keep the dialogue going.
I suppose there's a yes, but here again, isn't there? Yes, but. Is this possible when you come from a different background from me, a totally different experience from me, a different frame of reference from me, and you wanted to tell me what is right for me? And I say, but you, whoever you happen to be, you can't know me that well to know what is good for me. You might think you know what's good for me, but it's the difference between their imposing something upon me and unfolding something to unfold as to what can be valid between us. I and thou is what happens between people, what happens because you think it should. There's a betweenness. I and thou is a between one and the other. What is happening and how can that space be open to the conversation, to a way of being with the other person in a non-imposing way, being open to the other person so that we more than hear each other, we actually enter a conversation with each other. Very difficult, isn't it? Very difficult. Because sooner or later, I want to tell you what's good for you. And human beings have been doing that to each other in various ways for generations. And finish up killing each other.
Yeah. Because
you're wrong and I'm right. And you better get this right straight. If I'm right, then I'm going to insist that you hear me. I'm going to tell you what's right, and you've got to accept what I think is right. Now, that need not be what I really believe, but that's how we lock in to each other.
So it's fascinating to me. There's something has shifted. There's something has shifted in the American soil. That people no longer have contempt of ideas. Now, I think it's, that's been part of life forever, that we can have contempt for someone's ideology. What has happened now is that people have contempt for the person holding the ideology.
Yeah.
And I think that is the poison that is soiling, that is destroying our life together. That I think you and I can have a conversation. I think we can have a conversation if I hold you as a thou, who just happens to have some ideas that I disagree vehemently with. But if I respect you as a person and I hold you as a thou, hopefully we can have a dialogue around those ideas we disagree with. But what's taking place now is that I just have contempt for you. And it's hard to know where to go with that. So I think civility is too low of a bar these days. I think somehow we have to find a way to rehumanize one another. Because in conversations that are taking place on the public space, there's so much demonization, there's so much demeaning, so much it. So I think Buber was right. That is at the core, that is at the heart of everything, is to rehumanize one another, to see the other person as sacred from the religious point of view, I guess, to recognize that each person bears within them the image of God, whatever that might mean, but they bear within them something sacred. And maybe that's what connects us. And I think one of the ways we recover, I said earlier that I actually think it's curiosity that breaks contempt. So rather than me judging you and holding contempt for you because you hold this opinion that I disagree with, that's headspace. What if I went to heart space? Francis, I would love to know more about your life story. No, I don't know what you need. I don't know why you think the way you do, but I want to find out. So would you be willing to share a little bit about some of the experiences that you have had that have led you to have this opinion?
You're asking me how I feel about certain things?
I'm asking you to share. Well, I'm just using this as an example,
Yeah.
but I'm asking you to share your life story with me, or at least a story or stories, as opposed to just, I had this experience recently where someone had a very, very different view on guns than I do. And I could tell in the early part, we weren't going to convince each other, So I said, tell me something about your experience with guns, and maybe your early experience with, growing up with guns, that has led you to hold this view the way that you do. Now, we walked out of the room still holding different opinions, but I knew something of his life story. We connected. So there's a relational dialogue, and I think actually a relational container where I actually think we can have dialogue on that particular topic. I'm not sure where we'll go, but there's a container that will carry us. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it does. I grew up with guns too, always. In my family and in my society, guns were present. Perhaps different from what the American experience was. Guns were part of sport, were part of life in the world. And they were there, but we had imposed upon them, you learn how to use a gun. You learned how not to use a gun. You learned a system of values that you imposed upon the gun world, or my world of being able to use a gun, and so on. So it's not an easy conversation, is it? To hear the very topic that you pick on, how we might live in a world of guns and yet still be basically human, rather than wanting to destroy each other with the gun. Very difficult.
And I think it comes back again to all that we've been talking about, that being able to see you as a thou, empathy, being able to hear you, actually being willing to listen to you and kind of believe your experience as you're sharing it, rather than imposing what I think your experience should be. So hearing you, being willing to let go of my need to be right long enough where we can have a conversation. And then finally, to me, that sense of, well, what do you need? If we're friends, to be able to say, this friendship, I really value this friendship. And how can I best support you right now? What would that look like? Rather than assuming I know.
I suppose we need to listen again and say, but what is our intention? Do we have any intention? How can we, when you live that part of the world and I live in this part of the world, that you have your belief systems, I have mine, how can there be a meeting between the two? When in fact, it's very difficult to get a meeting.
Well, you nailed it. It's the intent. And if we have an intent to move towards one another, we create this unusual scenario where we're talking to each other via Zoom and sharing this conversation that may or may not be beneficial to others, but it begins with good intent. You know, the good intent is, I have an intent to move towards you because I really value my relationship with you. My relationship with you is something, one of the most treasured gifts of my life. And so it's really important for me to move towards you. So that was the intent. So it really begins, I think, how we began this conversation, as we think of our relationships and recognizing our relationships are so important, and for people to reflect in their own dynamics, you know, how am I moving against? How am I moving away? What are the simple movements I can make to move towards the people in my life? I want to share a prayer that you wrote. Francis, you wrote this prayer last year. It's a prayer of optimism. I don't know if you remember it. You said, may life in all its fullness entice you to embrace the gifts of life around us. And then you said, may we listen for the good possibilities for our life. But then you wrote, may we look for and listen for the good purposes in the people we meet. And may we be carriers of a good spirit for the world. And I would just add to your prayer, in a world that I think is absolutely addicted to moving away or moving against one another, may we move towards each other, seeing the thou, the sacred in one another, seeing the best in one another. May we carry a good spirit toward one another, a spirit that affirms, encourages, enlarges, and uplifts. As always, my time spent with you in these conversations leaves me feeling affirmed and encouraged and uplifted, and it's a real gift. I'm really, really grateful.
Yes, thank you. And I add, may it always be so. May it always be so. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, that is certainly a large topic, and it's hard, I find, to try and sum it up very, very quickly. But what I will say is that I was very much taken by the concept of the moving away, against, and towards, and also with the thought of what is the relationship that we have with ourselves. I like the 4 points of I see you, I hear you, I do not need to be right. That'll be strange for me. And how can I best care for you? And I can see that there's been quite a bit of debate around the golden rule versus the platinum rule. But it's one that I think we could have, and it could be very meaningful. Well, that's all for November. Thank you for being with us, and thank you to Francis, thank you to Stephen, and to the person in the background who does the editing, etc., Iona. And until next month, goodbye.